Good morning, it's Friday the 24th of April. I'm Maret Gwyn and you're watching Europe Today, your daily dose of news and analysis broadcast live here from Brussels. Coming up on today's show, EU leaders are gathering in Cyprus to talk Ukraine, Iran, energy and mutual defence. They arrive fresh off a major win, having unblocked a crucial loan for Ukraine and sanctions on Russia. Leaders from Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Jordan and the Gulf are also flying in for talks on the situation in the Middle East. And as world leaders gather at the Delphi Economic Forum in Greece, we speak to former European Council President Charles Michel about Europe's role on the global stage and his deeply critical stance towards the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. And US President Donald Trump has said that Israel and Lebanon have agreed a 3-week extension to the ceasefire in Israel's war on Hezbollah. It came after direct talks between the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors to the US, the second such talks in recent days.
They like each other. I found that out today, and I've sort of heard about that. They actually like each other, Lebanon and Israel. They've agreed to an additional 3 weeks of no firing, ceasefire, no more firing. Let's see. We hope that happens. It's not going to happen between them, but they do have Hezbollah to think about.
But first, for our top story today, we're taking you to Cyprus, where EU leaders are holding an informal summit against a fraught geopolitical backdrop. Last night, over dinner, leaders discussed plans to revive the EU's little-known defence clause amid deepening cracks in the relationship between the US and its European allies. Today, they'll tackle the EU's long-term budget, and they'll also lunch with leaders from the Middle East. For more, we can cross over to Cyprus now, and to our correspondent Jorge Liboreiro, who's there for us. Great to see you, Jorge, this morning. Listen, this should have been Viktor Orban's last summit, but he's decided to skip, and that really seems to be defining this gathering.
Kalimera Maret. Indeed, the longest-serving member of the European Council is not making his way to this summit. It would have been his farewell summit, so to speak, after 16 years of uninterrupted power. But as we remember, Viktor Orban was defeated in the polls earlier this month, and opposition leader Peter Magyar took over with the promise of restoring ties between Budapest and Brussels. Leaders yesterday, as they made their way to the dinner, were noticeably relieved by the change in power, because Viktor Orban has been a figure of disruption and obstruction for 16 years, and now everybody wants to bring back a sense of normalcy into the collective decision-making.
And Jorge, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was also there, joining the leaders over dinner yesterday. And he had some very interesting comments on Ukraine's bid to join the European Union.
Yes, indeed. At first, we didn't know if Zelensky was going to make it in person to the summit here in Cyprus. But after the vetoes on the 90 billion loan and the package of sanctions against Russia were lifted earlier this week, he decided to show up in person, and his message was unmistakable. He was pushing to really speed up the accession process of Ukraine, which has been blocked by Hungary for almost 2 years now. The frustration of Zelensky was very palpable as well. He said that he needs a clear date for accession and he wants to speed up the process as soon as possible. However, other leaders, like the prime ministers of Belgium and Luxembourg, were more cautious. They said that they don't want any shortcuts, they don't want any fast tracks for Ukraine's accession. So my short analysis here in Cyprus is that after the end of the Orban era, EU leaders will have to finally face head-on the complex issue of Ukraine's accession with no easy answers. And yesterday, I got to talk to one of these leaders, the Estonian Prime Minister, Michel, and we talked about accession, but also other topics that are hot on the agenda right now. Take a listen.
We'll see, because always there's a chance at least for a fresh start. So it will mean that you can start again. And to be honest, I cannot see any other way that Ukraine's future is in Europe. That is definitely so. That will mean that the question is only when, not if. And how.
Now, I know you've been working on an initiative to introduce an European-wide ban for Russian soldiers who have taken part in the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Why are you pushing for this measure now, and why is it so important to you?
It's not even important to me, but it's important to everybody living in Europe, because to put it very simple terms, that before the war and at the start of the war, Russia had less men under the arms than right now. So we have more men under the arms right now than at the start of the war. And we would imagine for a moment that the war would stop, there will be ceasefire, peace, and somewhat, hopefully just and lasting peace. Fine, but what will those people do? Most of them are criminals, but they have to be treated as heroes inside Russia. So, once again, I would ask everybody that, do you want these guys near to your home? No, you don't. So that's why you have to ban them for life from Schengen.
Ideally, you think it could happen this year, or do you think it needs more time?
Ideally. It could happen, it should happen before the summer, but this is ideally. I have this kind of feeling that we will be talking about it before the summer already, but I don't know if enough decisions will be made before the summer, but I hope so.
Mm-hmm. Another issue here for this informal summit is mutual assistance. We know that the European treaties have an article of mutual assistance, 42.7. It hasn't been explored until now, but we also know that many member states like yours are also part of NATO, which has an Article 5 of collective defense. Do you see a possible contradiction between these two articles, or can they coexist?
They are coexisting because, for example, NATO Article 5 has been invoked only once from the United States, and European Article 42.7 has been also invoked once by France. So the question is about the need, and they can exist together, I would say, because usually it's pretty much overlapping what we're doing, because you need certain assistance, you need your allies to act with you. So I would say this is working well, but also we should talk about European capabilities, because as we can see, President Trump's message is also that Europe should bear more burden in own defense.
Mm-hmm. Trump has also threatened to withdraw the United States from NATO. He's been saying this several times. We don't know what's going to happen, but do you think that because of these threats that he's making so publicly, the value of Article 5 has been decreased, that it's not so powerful anymore?
I would say no to that, because, for example, when we had Russian MiGs in our space a little bit before that, certain Russian drones were in Poland's airspace, which was shot down. First time in NATO's history at that moment. At that moment, Trump's message was quite clear that America is standing to protect Baltics, Poland, and so on. So I would say that the messages have been quite clear that NATO is working. And also in Hague, we had NATO summit there, and Trump said that if Europe is sharing the burden, he will commit to NATO. Yes, I can understand that there's a lot of political messages, but the military side is working absolutely well.
That was the Estonian Prime Minister Michel speaking to our correspondent Jorge Liboreiro, and we'll of course keep an eye out for Jorge's reporting throughout the day from those talks in Cyprus. Now, when he was president of the European Council, Charles Michel had a notoriously strained relationship with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Those tensions have resurfaced in recent weeks. Our Europe editor, Maria Tadeo, caught up with Michel earlier today at the Delphi Economic Forum. She began by asking him about von der Leyen's leadership style, often described as highly centralised, and whether sufficient checks and balances exist to keep that approach in check.
All of us, we know what we have to do, but I'm observing that it seems that it's difficult to make decisions that are urgent and that are needed. I trust the European Council. I think that by nature, the European Council is the right body to decide what are the main orientations and also to make the most difficult decisions because, the European Council is the guardian of the European unity. And this European unity is something that's not easy to achieve. It requires a lot of work, a lot of preparation. It requires a lot of collective intelligence. It requires to listen to each other. And I'm confident that sooner or later the European Council will make additional decisions to clarify some of the orientations we have to decide on in the near future.
Are we to understand, therefore, that the Council's stance, it should be stronger, it should have a louder voice? It's not as strong as it should be, this message now.
It's in my opinion, it's not a question of voice, it's a question of decisions that have to be made. And what is a bit frustrating for all those like me who are absolutely convinced that this project is more needed than ever, the European project, the European dream, the European principles, the European values, the European coexistence. What is frustrating is the fact that all of us, we know what we have to do. We know exactly what we have to do. Everything is on the table. And I'm observing that there are always good reasons to procrastinate. There are always good reasons to waste time, and that's regrettable. And again, I don't want to blame anyone in particular. Let's be clear. That's not my point. When I want to blame someone, I'm very clear. You know me. Here, that's not my point. My point is let's look at the future, and we have tools. We have capacities, we have capabilities, we have great companies, we have great searchers, we have a lot of strength within the EU. And there is a crisis, there is chaos across the world. And by experience, we know when it's difficult in the world, in general, the EU is able to learn lessons fast. Let's act faster and let's learn our lessons.
Some would argue the weakness at times of the Council goes back to the idea of unanimity. And that has been dragging the action and certainly the pace and the speed around it. Viktor Orban obviously has been crushed in a defeat. Viktor Orban now is gone from the Council. Is that going to make things better? Or actually, would you argue the dynamics are more profound? Even with the Hungarian Prime Minister gone, this issue will remain.
Look, I hope that it will help the European Council to be more united in the future. But
are you relieved that Viktor Orban lost?
I wouldn't say that, because I will tell you why. Because I think that based on the experience I have on some topics, some in the European Council were hiding behind Viktor Orban, point one. And point two, in some of the European countries, you can have tomorrow some national leaders who are not so far from Viktor Orban's ideology on some topics, including on Ukraine, for instance, point one. Point two, does it mean that unanimity is a problem? For sure, unanimity is a challenge, there is no doubt. But I think we should think carefully before making a decision to not to use unanimity anymore, because if you stop to try to involve every country in the same decision, the risk is that you will weaken the weight of the EU at international level. And that's why I think that the priority should be different. In my opinion, we should fight against the abuse of this veto right. Because if you follow the philosophy and the principle for the Lisbon Treaty, the idea was really that the veto right was supposed to be used when your vital interests are at risk. And the problem is that today, too many countries are tempted too many times to use this veto right as a kind of tool to blackmail and to get something into the fight. That's the problem, the one I think.
It seems to me, however, listening to the leaders just finally on this point, that they would agree enlargement needs to happen as soon as possible and complete the union, but they would also say we need to reform and there is no fast track for Ukraine. Are those three statements compatible?
Yeah, but what you are mentioning is agreed language, no fast track, etc. When we want to do something, but in parallel, we add a sentence so that it is in fact more difficult to get the result. Let's be clear. There is no doubt that in those countries they have to do their homework and they know what they have to do. They have to put in place the reform. They have to guarantee the independence of justice, to fight against corruption, etc. Point one. On the other hand, let's be honest. In some of the European countries, it was very comfortable to use the argument of those countries not acting as fast as needed, because there is in some European countries a difficult political debate with this enlargement policy. And I think in those circumstances, we we could all win if we tell the truth to our people. Everywhere in Europe, the future will be more stable, more secure with them within the EU. And of course, there's some efforts, but you have also other efforts that are needed in terms of domestic reforms and in terms of what kind of policy we put in place.
That was the former president of the European Council, Charles Michel, speaking to our Europe editor, Maria Tadeo. Now, the FIFA Football World Cup is just around the corner, happening this summer, of course, in the US, Canada and Mexico, and it's becoming deeply intertwined with global politics. The Trump administration is reportedly working behind the scenes to replace Iran, which did qualify for the tournament, with Italy, which painfully lost in the playoffs to Bosnia and Herzegovina, missing out on a spot in the World Cup for the third consecutive time. For more, our Jakob Jannes has this explainer.
Could the 2026 World Cup see a team that failed to qualify take to the pitch? A plan is brewing in Washington to give Italy a wildcard entry by replacing Iran. Paolo Zampolli, a special envoy to President Trump, confirmed he has pitched the swap to both the White House and FIFA President Gianni Infantino. But wait a second, is this game changer even in the rule book? The Financial Times reports this is an attempt to repair ties between Trump and Italy's Giorgia Meloni after the Republic spat over the Iran war and the Pope. And Zampolli argues Italy 4 world titles offer the pedigree to join the 2026 tournament hosted across the US, Mexico and Canada. Alright, but how is it legal? Article 6 of the World Cup regulations gives FIFA sole discretion to replace any team that withdraws or is excluded. And while Iran insists they plan to participate, FIFA has already set a precedent. Just last summer, they used the same powers to hand a spot at the Club World Cup to Inter Miami, enabling Lionel Messi to play. But football is not the only arena where the guest list is being rewritten. This February, Russia and Belarus were barred from flying their flags at the Milano Cortina 2026 Winter Olympics in response to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Yet, when the Paralympics, which are governed by a different body than the Olympics, allowed these symbols back after a Swiss court ruling, the European Commission boycotted the opening ceremony. Sport Commissioner Glenn Nikalev called the return of the national banners unacceptable, while Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine continues. So if Italy does make it to Los Angeles this June, it could be the most historic wildcard in the history of the sport. They just have to hope their diplomatic pedigree is as strong as their footballing one, especially after the brutal defeat to Bosnia and Herzegovina in the qualifying playoff final.
And that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for your company today and throughout this week. We will be bringing the latest from that meeting of EU leaders taking place right now in Cyprus. Our correspondent Jorge Liboreiro is there on the ground. Keep an eye out for his reporting throughout the day on Euronews and Euronews.com. You can also get in touch with us. Email us at europetoday@euronews.com with your tips, questions and feedback. We love to hear from you. We'll be back on Monday with more news and more analysis from Brussels and across our European bureaus. In the meantime, do have a great weekend.